And welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about Doug Burgum and the possibility that the North Dakota governor will be selected by Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee for vice president in 2024. Now, this process of choosing the Republican vice presidential nominee has been an absolute roller coaster for many candidates. I mean, this has been talked about for years now, and there were people years ago who seemed, even before we knew for sure who the nominee would be, we now know it's Donald Trump, there were people who it seemed could be possibilities for whoever may be the nominee, right? And this goes back, again, as I said, years. People have been looking for this position. I'm sure multiple people ran for president in 2024 on the Republican side simply to be selected as vice president. I'm looking at people like Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, Francis Suarez, etc. So, it has been a very long process, and we are finally narrowing it down to the actual selection. And now more than ever, it appears that the really unlikely candidate of Doug Burgum, who is the governor of North Dakota, a very rural state, barely, little name recognition at all, but he ran for president on the Republican side. Maybe he was one of the candidates who, we could see his campaign here, maybe he was one of the candidates who simply ran to be selected as a VP. But Doug Burgum now, this little-known North Dakota governor, does appear to be the most likely pick as of right now for Donald Trump. And, we are forming this conclusion based off of many things. But, this is big. The website domain TrumpBurgum.com redirects to the actual Trump campaign website. You type in TrumpBurgum.com, and it brings you to DonaldJTrump.com. Now, looking at the other finalists, Marco Rubio, you type in TrumpRubio.com, it does not redirect to the Trump website. TrumpVance.com, it does not redirect to the website. Trump Burgum does. I really think that Doug Burgum is the most likely pick as of right now. And this comes after, you've got, now editorials, opinions from the New York Post, for example, now coming out in support of Doug Burgum. Multiple politicians coming out and saying that Doug Burgum would be the best pick for Donald Trump. This is just such an unlikely story right here, with Doug Burgum being, the leading contender to be Trump's vice president. Just a few months ago, nobody knew who this guy was. Still, very few people know who Doug Burgum is. So it would be just such an interesting choice on Trump's part if the selection would be Doug Burgum. But looking at this short list, it really does make sense when you look at everything. It really does make sense that Doug Burgum would be the guy. Because looking at the short list, these were the people that the Trump campaign sent vetting documents to. Vetting, meaning searching or documenting a candidate's the various candidates for VP, documenting and researching their history to make sure that they don't have any controversies, scandals that could be brought up by the Democrats during the general election campaign that would in turn hurt the Trump campaign. So this means that this would be the shortlist, right? Anyone that they sent those vetting documents to, that would be the shortlist for VP, the official shortlist. Now, this was not too long ago that this shortlist was revealed, but it was Doug Burgum, Ben Carson, Tom Cotton, Byron Donalds, Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, Elise Stefanik, J.D. Vance, and recently added was Glenn Youngkin. They sent vetting papers to him a little later on than the other ones. So, looking at this field of candidates, it really doesn't appear that Doug Burgum would be the strongest. But ruling out some people, ruling out some other possibilities, like Ben Carson. I think everyone knows that Ben Carson would only hurt the ticket. He has zero charisma at all. I don't see why the Trump campaign would even consider someone like Ben Carson, to be completely honest. You've got Tom Cotton, who is extremely controversial. When it comes to issues that the Republican Party may not be on the most popular side on, like abortion or anything like that. Tom Cotton is going to be on the far right side. And, this will turn away the moderate voters that Trump absolutely needs in this election. Byron Donalds as well. Tim Scott has zero charisma, just like Ben Carson. He seems very disingenuous. And apparently Trump does not want him just because of that fact, the fact that he has zero charisma. And, looking at the poly market here, I'm going back to that. But today, Tim Scott is at 5% on the poly market. The poly market is people betting. In this instance, people betting on who Trump will pick for VP. Tim Scott is at 5%. 5% of people say that Trump will pick Tim Scott. Not too long ago, Tim Scott was all the way number 1. And by a mile, too. It was like Tim Scott, and then number 2, I think, was like Ben Carson or J.D. Vance for some time. So it has really been a dramatic turn of events for specifically Tim Scott. While candidates like J.D. Vance and Doug Burgum and Marco Rubio have risen gradually on the poly market, Tim Scott just saw a sudden drop. No one really has any faith that Tim Scott will be selected as VP. And, as time passed, it just became less and less likely that Trump would pick Tim Scott. I mean, especially when we heard the reports that Trump simply did not want to pick him because of his lack of charisma. So it's really interesting. I thought for quite a while that Tim Scott would be the selection, but now that appears that I'm wrong. And then we have Elise Stefanik, who, I mean, I don't think would be a horrible pick, but she just doesn't get any attention. I mean, she's not like Burgum or Rubio or Tim Scott or even Ben Carson, who's going out on these Sunday shows, the Sunday morning shows, right? Like State of the Union on CNN, Meet the Press on MSNBC, etc. this week on ABC. She is not very active. It doesn't really appear that she wants this job all that much. She really doesn't. That's what it looks like. Then we have J.D. Vance, and we're going to get to J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, and Doug Burgum because they're the finalists here. But then we have Glenn Youngkin. Not too many problems with Glenn Youngkin at all. I'm surprised he's not a finalist. I don't know what would turn away Trump from Youngkin. I guess the only thing would be loyalty. Loyalty is extremely important to Donald Trump. And for quite some time now, I mean, especially during his gubernatorial campaign in Virginia, Youngkin turned away Trump. He didn't want Trump's support. He didn't want Trump campaigning for him because he knew in a blue state like Virginia it would have been a kiss of death, and he would have been right considering his very narrow victory. But he is a more moderate Republican, but, I mean, again, very distanced from Trump even throughout his term as governor so far. So that leaves Doug Burgum, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance really as the finalists. Now, there's some technical things when you look at Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance that really would turn them away. Marco Rubio and Donald Trump are both in the state of Florida. According to the Constitution, the president and vice president would not or could not be from the same state. Now, that's minor. Marco Rubio could easily change his residency, or Donald Trump, I think, or whatever. Doesn't really matter. But what's more important, and this goes for J.D. Vance too, is that these are both senators. That means that if they were to be elected vice president, they would have to resign from the Senate, and that means a special election. Trump choosing Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance, in turn, forces a special election in Ohio and Florida, which it's not like this is Wyoming. It's not like, Florida and Ohio are both red states, not to get, whatever, get me wrong. Ohio voted for Trump by 8, Florida by 3.4, but Florida will shift heavily towards Trump in 2024. But it's not like it's Wyoming, right, which voted for Trump by 46%. They would have to put a little money into these races, right, especially if it's Florida. I mean, they put money into these races in 2022. It just makes it a lot more complicated. Out of these three, Doug Burgum, he's the easiest. He's retiring. He's not running for another term in 2024, he's not running for another term in 2024 for governor. He's retiring at the end this year, so he could finish up his term as governor and head right into his vice presidency. No special election, no money, or anything of that nature required. I mean, he is just a very easy pick. And out of these three, J.D. Vance, very conservative. He is, kind of in line with Tom Cotton when you look at his record. Really doesn't bring in many conservative many more moderate-minded suburban voters that much. He in fact turns them away. I think that J.D. Vance would be an awful choice, and I don't know why Trump is even considering him that much, because J.D. Vance is not the most loyal Trump supporter. He's really not. Now, of course, he's all on board with Trump, but in the past, he has said some very anti-Trump remarks that the Democrats could possibly use, in the campaign, saying even Trump's own vice president doesn't like him, or has made these comments in the past. That could definitely be something that would be used in the campaign. And then you've got Marco Rubio, who I really think would be a good pick, but then there's that whole special election thing, and you've got to change your residency. It would be very complicated with Marco Rubio being from the state of Florida. But I really think that Marco Rubio would be a good pick. I think that he could have some difficulties when it comes to charisma, like Tim Scott. But, Doug Burgum maybe has that, he has just as much as charisma, I think, as Marco Rubio. So I think that Burgum and Rubio would definitely be two solid choices. But I think what Trump is thinking right now is really about his 2016 selection. Because in 2016, of course, he chose Mike Pence to be his running mate. And, he was a little-known red state governor, the governor of Indiana. And he was a very safe, boring, but safe option. And what do you know? It came out successful. I mean, Donald Trump won by the thinnest of margins. He won Wisconsin by 0.76%, Michigan by just 0.22%, Pennsylvania by 0.72%. I'm definitely not saying that Hillary would have won the election if the vice presidential selection had been someone else. But is it a possibility that, considering just how narrow these margins are, 0.2% is just about 50-50. If Mike Pence, if someone who would have hurt the ticket a bit more than Mike Pence had been selected, I don't know if Michigan would have gone to Donald Trump, but Mike Pence brought a sense of a presidential kind of tone and demeanor to the ticket, a more presidential kind of feel to the ticket, a more official kind of vibe to the ticket. In contrast, Mike Pence was very boring and standard and traditional, while on the other hand, in stark contrast, Donald Trump, slung insults left and right, is very unorthodox when you look at the Republican presidential nominees in recent history. So Mike Pence definitely brought that level of normalcy to the ticket that Trump was looking for, and it paid off. Considering these narrow margins, it definitely paid off. I am sure Mike Pence didn't hurt the ticket. Now, Doug Burgum, he brings that exact type of thing to the ticket. He's a very safe option. I assume he doesn't bring any scandals or anything of that nature to the ticket. He has a history in the business sector and the private sector that could definitely be used in the campaign for other suburban voters whichever voters value the economy as an issue as a voter. So Doug Burgum, aligns with Mike Pence in that aspect, very much so. If Trump were to pick Doug Burgum, it would be for the same reasons that he picked Mike Pence in 2016. That kind of traditional, safe feel to the ticket that is always needed for a Trump ticket. So I think that it will be Doug Burgum. Again, the website redirects that now, and not to mention other people think so too. I don't know why Polymarket doesn't list Doug Burgum as an option, but when you look at the option of other man, which leads with a total of 36%, you see that, here it is. You see that Doug Burgum is at 34%. So of that other man option, almost all of it is people voting for Doug Burgum, because it's 34% of that 36%. So, and then in second place is J.D. Vance, who's at 18%. So, Doug Burgum is the obvious favorite as of right now to be Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate in 2024. So thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe. It helps out a lot. If you like this type of content, become a channel member. That always helps out the channel, pushing out more videos greatly. Again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.